Great. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and a really warm welcome to Ipswich Minster. To those of you here in church, well done for coming out on a very dark and cold night, but also for those who are joining online for this, the 13th and final instalment of our A Church for England series. Throughout this series, we have been seeking to create a space in which we can explore what a good Church of England should look like for the nation it serves, by engaging with some of the most vital and pressing issues of our time. Tonight, we are richly blessed, pun intended, to finish it all off with our very own Archdeacon of Suffolk, Rich Henderson, who will be reflecting on what a good Church of England should look like for the rural church. Now, Rich is a particularly perfect person, not just for this talk, but for this whole series, because Rich really is Mr. Church of England. Before ordination, Rich was a senior manager in the motorway services sector. He was both, and during this time, was both a church warden and a licensed lay minister in urban and estate settings. Since ordination, he has served as a team vicar in rural and coastal areas, a rector across Market Town and rural benefices, a rural dean, and now an archdeacon overseeing a largely rural archdeaconry. So other than holding the office of a bishop, not yet anyway, Rich has seen and served the Church of England from top to bottom, from city to countryside to coast. We could not find anyone then with better experience to speak to us on this most important of topics. But with Rich, it's not simply the doing, because throughout all his ministry, and especially as a rural dean and as an archdeacon, he has been known for his commitments to supporting local churches as they navigate the realities of the present day, from small congregations and stretched resources to deep opportunities that come from long-standing relationships, local presence, and faith embedded in place. His ministry has consistently focused on helping churches remain faithful to their missional calling, while also being rooted, resilient, and responsive to the communities they serve. And in this, Rich combines practical leadership experience with a strong pastoral and relational vision for the Church of England as a parish-based missional church for the whole nation. We are delighted then to welcome Archdeacon Rich, whose experience, insight, and passion for the rural church will help shape and encourage our thinking as we reflect together on what the future of the Church of England is in rural communities. And on top of that, Rich is just a really great guy. So please give a really warm Ipswich Minster welcome to Archdeacon Rich.
My goodness, it's like this is your life. Tom, thank you for the invitation. I know where to come if I need a reference in the future. It's a joy to be with you this evening. I didn't realise, I've watched all of the talks online from my home in Yoxford, but I didn't realise I was number 13, so unlucky for you. It is me tonight. Somebody said to me, they've saved the best till last earlier today, and I said more like the dregs. But it's good to be here. To reflect on what Tom said is a really important subject, because it is, certainly in our diocese, but in many other dioceses across the Church of England, the key part, the key way in which we are in ministry across a rural setting. Tom's touched on some of this that I'm going to share at the beginning, but prior to being in this diocese from 2006, I'm in my 20th year this year, my focus had been as a church warden and a lay minister on urban council estates, a parish that had 30,000 people, 2 churches that were almost being broken into every night of the week. It was a tough place to be and to minister, but I loved it. And I was convinced that after theological college, my curacy would be on an urban estate. It's where I absolutely felt called to. And while I was at theological college, in my second year, we had to do a parish placement, and I chose 2 rural parishes in Derbyshire so I could tick the rural box, and then I could get back and do urban ministry. And that placement was amazing. I loved it, loved being with those people, and I'm still in connection with them today. But God had other plans. I was looking for an urban curacy. The bishop then said to me, I'm going to release you, Rich, which in other words means I'm not giving you a curacy. And that's how I found myself, my wife and my 4 children, all of us, moving to Suffolk in 2006. And it was a culture shock from being on an urban estate in Nottingham to living in what is the beautiful market town in this county of Beccles. And I remember my mum phoning me a couple of weeks in, and I said, I just feel like I've gone back in time. And that was because everything was slower. 20 years on, I don't want to live in any other place and do anything any differently. I love the pace of our county, our rural communities. But the Archdeaconry I now serve, which covers most of East Suffolk and skirts around Ipswich, has 226 churches in it. And only 3 of those are single parish beneficers, where it's one church, one vicar. Only 3 out of 226. So the rest are in what we call multi-parish beneficers. And most of those are deeply rural. So it's from that rural multi-parish benefice setting and experience I'm going to speak tonight. Whenever we speak about rural ministry in Suffolk, I believe we must always begin not with structures and strategies, but with place. East Suffolk is not merely the setting in which ministry happens, it's an active participant in it. The land itself shapes us, shapes who we are. The long horizons, the big skies, the slow rhythm of the seasons, the agricultural year, the closeness to field, to river and to sea. All of these quietly inform how people understand time, belonging, change, and I believe faith. Many of our churches have stood in the villages across this diocese for 8, 9, even 10 centuries. They've witnessed plague and prosperity, decline and renewal. For generations, they've marked the great thresholds of human life: birth, marriage, and death. Even now, when regular attendance in many small churches is small itself, there's often an emotional and spiritual connection to the heart of each community. People may not come often, but they care deeply. They want the building to be open, the bells to be rung, the dead to be buried with dignity, the church to be present at all the moments that matter in the life of a village. And it's within this context that rural multi-parish ministry exists. Not as a failure of imagination, nor simply as a response to fewer clergy, although I have to say some of the larger beneficers that my clergy oversee, 12, 13 parishes, are as the result of clergy posts being cut in the past. But they exist, I believe, as a calling, a profound calling. And rural multi-parish ministry, I think, offers us a calling today to rediscover what it means to be the church in these contexts. Not as isolated units, but as people bound together in Christ, sharing responsibility for prayer, for mission, and for care across a number of communities. East Suffolk is often described as idyllic, and it is. It's beautiful. But beauty does not mean simplicity, and it certainly does not mean life is all easy. Our villages are diverse. Some are growing rapidly with new housing. Others feel fragile and isolated. Some are home to commuters and second homeowners. Others to long-established families whose roots go back for many generations. And in many places, the population is aging. In others, young families struggle with housing affordability and access to services. I hear so often that loneliness is one of the most significant pastoral realities in our rural communities. It's often hidden, unspoken, and deeply entrenched. There's mental health challenges, financial anxiety, and social isolation. These all exist here in this context, just as surely as they do in the towns and cities of our nation. Though in the rural, they are often less visible. At the same time, the parish system continues to shape how people understand belonging. Even those with little explicit Christian faith will say, and I've heard this so many times, this is our church, or that's my church. A few months ago, I was working with one of my parish priests who had no PCC for one of his 13 churches. Him and the parish administrator, the benefits administrator, were the PCC. Nobody in the village was involved in the governance of this small church in a very small village. So we decided we were going to hold a public meeting, and we put a postcard-size invitation through every door. And all it said on it was, you're invited to a meeting to discuss the future of, and then it had the name of the church. I turned up that evening with 4 members of our diocesan church buildings team, and the lay chair of the deanery was there as well, and I thought, we're going to outnumber everybody. 25 villagers turned out that night, me of little faith. And from that group, we now have 6 who are keen to support the life of the church because they want to make sure their monthly service happens, that their church is cared for and there for the future. But if we'd not put that leaflet through each house in that village, then they wouldn't have responded. But the relationship was already there. We just needed to build on the connection. The parish church is still perceived as a place that holds the community's story. And this creates both opportunity and attention. Opportunity because in lots of communities the church still has trust in a local setting, and it holds a symbolic presence. Tension because expectations formed in a different era, how we used to do things years ago when there probably was one vicar for 1 or 2 churches, feed into a very different reality today. When one priest serves multiple parishes in a rural setting, the unspoken question often becomes, how can ministry remain personal and focused when it has to be shared so widely? And this, I believe, is not a question of efficiency, it's a question of identity. But let me just reflect a little bit biblically and with some theological vision for what I think is behind multi-parish rural ministry. If we're to respond faithfully, we must begin with theology, not logistics or strategy. The church from its earliest days was never meant to exist as a collection of isolated communities. The New Testament presents a vision of interconnected churches, house churches, regional gatherings, communities bound together by prayer, mutual support, and a shared mission. St. Paul's image of the body of Christ is particularly illuminating for rural multi-parish ministry. The body is made up of many parts, each with its own function, character, and gift. No part is redundant, no part is complete in itself. Health comes not from independence, but interdependence. This challenges a deeply embedded assumption within our parish system, that each parish must be able to sustain its full life independently. In today's context, that assumption can become a source of great anxiety and exhaustion. Multi-parish rural ministry invites us to rediscover something deeply biblical, that the church flourishes when gifts are shared, when leadership is collaborative, and when ministry is understood as the calling of the whole people of God. Theologically, this means placing baptism, not clergy availability, at the heart of ministry, understanding ordained ministry as enabling and forming others, and seeing collaboration not as loss, but as faithfulness. And this is not about lowering expectations of ministry, it's about broadening our understanding of who ministers. And then there are some emotional and practical realities to multi-parish ministry. If theology gives us vision, honesty gives us credibility. We must speak truthfully about the pressures involved, the weight of expectation. In rural communities, clergy are often expected to be visible, relational and present in a way that is deeply personal. The priest is not only a minister of word and sacrament, but also a familiar figure at the village coffee morning, village events, school occasions and moments of crisis. When that role is multiplied across many parishes, the pressure can become immense. Even when people are gracious and understanding, there's often a lingering sense of disappointment when the vicar or rector doesn't turn up at something. My inbox regularly gets those kind of emails. There's the pastoral cost of absence. Absence can easily be interpreted as, oh, he or she just doesn't care about us. But this is really intentional, but it is deeply felt. It requires careful communication, realistic expectation setting, and above all, trust. And then there's clergy well-being and sustainability. Multi-parish rural ministry can place clergy, their families and close friends under significant strain. Long hours, constant travel, emotional labour, and the sense of never quite being enough or being in the right place at the right time. All of this can erode joy and resilience. So we must say this clearly and without embarrassment. Sustainable ministry is faithful ministry. Burnout is not a badge of honour. A priest who is exhausted, resentful, or depleted cannot model the abundant life to which Christ calls us. And then there's anxiety about change. When parishes are invited to collaborate more closely, sharing worship, governance, mission priorities, fears often surface. I see this so often in my role today. People worry about losing their identity, their traditions, or even their building. These fears are not obstacles to be swept aside. They are expressions of love and an attachment, and they deserve to be held pastorally. But there are signs of hope across our diocese and across the Church of England. With all those challenges I've just mentioned, I want to say clearly, I am hopeful. Rural multi-parish ministry rooted in the small and local begins with attentiveness to place, people and rhythm, a pattern, valuing the faithfulness of the small congregations and the rhythms of village life. It's deeply connected to the church and community. Things that are going on where the church can play a part. Life with the local school, whether that's a church school or a community school. All these play important roles and points of building relationship in each place. The church being in the everyday spaces of village life. Rather than striving for scale or uniformity, it's about nurturing presence, trust and shared ministry across multiple parishes, recognising that God is often at work most powerfully in what is modest, familiar and deeply rooted in the life of each place. Across East Suffolk, I see multi-parish rural ministry bearing fruit in quite profound ways, where parishes gather together regularly to pray, whether through shared services, benefice festivals or seasonal celebrations. I see relationships deepening, congregations growing in depth and in number. People begin to see themselves not as competitors for attention, but companions in faith. I'm privileged to see the sharing and the collaboration across many beneficers. All are seeking to find the best way for themselves in their context, and it's different everywhere. I'm a great believer in trying new things, experimenting and encouraging people to take risks for the gospel. But as an archdeacon, I have to keep my eye on what they're doing. In many of these places, we regularly see festivals and seasons celebrated well, whether it's the rhythm of the church calendar or the agricultural year. Welcome, worship and hospitality are often drawing our rural communities together. Across different parts of Suffolk, we have Lightwave, our new worshipping community made up of small missional groups, new worshipping communities and hubs, households of faith rooted in simple shared practices, seeking to be church in new and different ways, and yet complementing the parish system. One of the other hopes and joys I see is the flourishing of lay ministry. One of the great gifts of rural multi-parish ministry is the rediscovery of lay vocations, whether that's readers, lay elders, worship leaders, youth and children's ministers, church wardens, treasurers, PCC secretaries, PCC members, bell ringers, the list goes on. Many serve faithfully and have done for years. And I hope now, in this day and age, they are being recognised far more for their contribution to the life of their church, to the life of our diocese, to the life of the Church of England. Everyone playing their part. And this focus and attention on lay ministry is not about clergy stepping back. It's the whole church stepping forward. Some of the other joys and hopes I see are about where the church in different locations is serving their community well, whether that's from food provision with food banks, top-up shops, those kind of things, creating warm spaces, although that's very difficult in probably 220 of my churches. But some are doing it. Partnerships with local schools, festival services. Rural churches continue to serve far beyond their numerical size. Often it's precisely because clergy time is limited and stretched that these sort of projects are led by the laity creatively, and where we're seeing church and community flourish. These acts of service may never make the headlines, but they are powerful signs of the kingdom of God in our midst. So as I've been preparing for tonight, I've been reimagining leadership and the role of the priest in a rural multi-parish way, because it does require reimagining, because the priest in many of these benefices is no longer the centre of every parish activity, but a pastoral presence across a wider landscape. And this involves a shift for that minister from doing to enabling, from being indispensable to being formative, from being in control to trusting others to get on with things. So the priest becomes a gatherer of gifts, a teacher of faith, and a sign of unity across what is quite often diverse parishes. And this kind of leadership is quieter, slower, and often less visible. It requires patience, humility, and confidence in God's work through others. It also requires the courage to let go of the familiar patterns and to trust that Christ is at work beyond our immediate reach. So looking forward, the future of rural ministry in East Suffolk, which I can speak of from experience, will not look like the past. But the gospel has never depended on nostalgia. We are being invited to imagine churches that are smaller but more connected, less clergy dependent but more Christ-centred, deeply rooted in place yet open to change. Multi-parish ministry, when lived well, offers a counter-cultural witness. In a society that prizes autonomy and self-sufficiency, we model in this way of being church interdependence. In a culture of speed, we embody patience. In a world anxious about decline, we proclaim hope. So my conclusion is faithfulness in quiet places. Rural ministry has always been about faithfulness in places the world may overlook. Seeds are sown quietly. Growth is often slow. Results are rarely dramatic. But God's purposes are not diminished by scale. In East Suffolk, amid fields and villages, countryside to coast, ancient towers and modern lives, God continues to call a people who pray, serve, and hope together. In a church for England, multi-parish ministry is not simply something we must manage. It's something through which God is shaping us as a church, shaping us into a church that is resilient, generous, collaborative, and deeply rooted in Christ. May we have the courage to embrace this calling, the humility to share it, and the faith to trust that God, who has been faithful here for centuries, will continue to be faithful still. Thank you.
Rich, thank you for such a beautiful, I think almost kind of poetic and lyrical walk through the reality of rural ministry, the Church of England, and what I think is a hopeful future. I loved your imagery about ministry in contexts such as that, not being about the priest stepping back, but the whole church stepping forward. And I think that is an example and a hope, not just in rural ministry, but across the whole church. Thank you so much for offering us that amongst so much else. We now, as has become our long custom of this nearly year-long series, turn to questions. And there's a hand shot up already at the back. This is Father John making me walk as far as possible.
Archdeacon Rich, I echo everything Tom has said. That was beautiful, that was encouraging, that was so honest as well. And I speak as one who for 5 years was a village organist and who for many years in East Kent, which is as rural as East Suffolk, I was interregnum priest, organist, scout leader of 2 villages, so I have some awareness of what you say. And I just wanted to, there are 3 areas that I thought perhaps could be explored at some stage. First of all, ecumenism, if there are any other Christian dominations left in the villages. Second, the place of the church physically, because, for example, I'm chaplain of Orwell Park School, which uses Nacton Church, which is a good half-mile from the village. And I know villages in Kent where new roads have cut off the church from the village. And third, the fact that very often, again I think of the village where I was organist, villages, neighbouring villages, have defined themselves over the centuries by not being the next village. So, for example, my village had been in civil war for Crown, the neighbouring village had been for Parliament. They're now in a multi-thing benefits together. And I say that as one who is so delighted to hear such a positive approach to village ministry.
Thank you, FJ. I'll respond in reverse order. So the kind of, I think identity is vital. both for villages and for the church in that village as well. So I think in a multi-parish setting, I've served two multi-parish benefices, and in each one, I've always encouraged each church within that benefice to have its own identity. So in one benefice, one of my smaller churches, they used Book of Common Prayer. So they were the church, that was their thing. Another church was very focused on children's ministry, so that was theirs. Another was serving the community. The other was the civic parish church. So they all had their own identity. The tension in that benefice, there was a huge tension between one community beyond the church, the community and the neighbouring community. They didn't like each other very much, and you either lived in one or you lived in the other. I think the church had a huge part to play, still does, in kind of bridging that. And serving both in the same loving way. So I think where communities are just stubborn with their identity, I think the church has a lot to give in that. I forgot your other two things now. I think the church built, I see this all the time. I'd have the joy of going in all the churches across the Archdeaconry, and I always look in the visitors' book to see what visitors write about a place. And often I kind of say to the clergy or the church wardens, have you seen what's in your visitors' book? Because the people have written some beautiful things. I think our church buildings have a ministry of their own without us doing anything. That's why I love to see them open. I love to see opportunities and resources to help people pray. I think the place of a building is key. I mean, we saw that when through COVID we had to close our churches. I had so many people across the villages I served that were so angry that they just couldn't go into the buildings, and we all felt that pain at the time. But it made me, I had people who I'd never seen anywhere near the church before complaining to me as well. So it made me think, well, yeah, of course it's their church as well, and this is a time when they do need it, they want to be in it. So I get frustrated if I see a church locked, because I think they are there for a community to use whenever. It's difficult in some places where we've got churches that are, as you say, out of the village itself. I think the church has to work doubly hard to connect with where people live in that village. And there's lots of examples of that across Suffolk, where the church is in another part of the village, often isolated. But I think we have to make sure that our villagers know in those places that the church is there and it's there for them. Yeah. For ecumenical, if I've had the joy of serving in places where there's always been other denominations in the benefice somewhere, so ecumenical working is key as well. And in one of my benefices, when the village church, parish church didn't have a service, it was at the Methodist church, and the congregations used to go across both, and that happens in lots of places. So I'd absolutely encourage ecumenical working.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things I'm taking away from this is almost a different set of values to those that we're often pushed in terms of, more numbers, more bums on seats and that sort of stuff. Yeah. One of the things it seems to me that rural churches have got is an aesthetic which people hunger for, particularly perhaps when they want to get married. Yeah. And I'm wondering how you feel about people choosing a church because it's pretty, but nevertheless stepping inside it and bringing their families with them, and how can the rural churches use that gift almost that they have, which is not just pandering to a rather superficial delight in quaintness?
I think you've partially answered it yourself. It is a gift. I think we do have a gift for people. I would always encourage anyone who wants to kind of mark a moment in their life, whatever it is, and weddings particularly, I would absolutely say go for it. And some of our rural churches that is their identity and their ministry. I've got some in my patch where it is they are a wedding venue. There's one I'm thinking of that happens to be next to a wedding venue for receptions. So they get lots of weddings from people from all over. But I think we've got an opportunity then, not just the clergy, but the whole congregation in that place, to make the connections with those couples who come. I can still remember from 20 years ago, the first wedding couples I married, and I still know that they are still connected to the church, and yet they live elsewhere. But when they're back with family, they're straight in at the church because they know we cared for them, we welcome them, and making people feel welcome is key. And we have the kind of legal qualifying connections to make. Let's make those and let's do it well and be hospitable and celebrate just an amazing sacrament with two people. I'd encourage any church just to go for it. And it is a gift. They're all at the back, look. True Anglicans.
What would you say are the key things that urban and town centre churches can learn from rural ministry?
Oh, good question. Maybe also something about identity. I think they are very different ministries in an urban setting. You've got a much bigger population, and probably I would say probably there's not that connection where I said before people say, "Oh, this is my church," even though they don't go very often. In a village, they really sense it's their church. In an urban setting, there'll be lots of other churches and lots of other denominations, so there's not that same connection. So for me, it would be about what is it that urban church offers the community that is really special, that's an identity. We've seen some of it happen here in this very building with this parish, and this becoming a minster. It's offering ministry in a different way. And I think anything that helps connection, I think certainly on an urban estate church, it's about serving people and blessing them. I'd say that for every church, but I think particularly in an urban church, on an estate, it was always about what can we do to best serve the people of this community who are in need in lots of different ways. How can we bless them? But I'd encourage every church to do that as well.
Thank you, Archdeacon. Now, with your knowledge as chair of the Diocesan Board of Education as well, and therefore your knowledge of the schools in Suffolk, particularly the rural areas, how do you think the impact of many closing rural schools affects the role of the parish church in those areas?
Great question. I think what we need to make sure is that the church, if I speak about church schools, so we've got 87 church schools across the diocese, I think we need to make sure that where they're placed within a benefice, that the connections are really good, that we work with church. We think in kind of church, school and family, the kind of whole, what Church of England calls the kind of growing faith model. To really encourage that. I think when we see it, when we're seeing, we've got a number of schools with low numbers, and there's often a kind of threat, are they going to close? Some have closed. I think we need to be really pastorally sensitive on the ground to kind of keep those connections, so the families will still be living locally, but the children might be going to school further. I think we need to do what we can to ensure that there's still a kind of really good pastoral connection, and there's still a link with those families in that village, and then stay connected in the best way we can to the school that they're going to. And hopefully that's still in the benefice, the size of some of our benefices, and we can still stay connected.
Rich, you've talked quite a bit about the theology of place, and clearly our mostly medieval churches across the diocese are burdens as well as major assets. I'm a great believer in the theology of place, and for prayers to have been said over centuries seeping into the very stones of the buildings that are quite often, not always, but quite often the central community seems to be really important. But is there any prospect of things changing in terms of the burden of maintenance of churches being taken away from the communities that struggle quite often to pay their parish share, etc., etc.? So it's just the sort of financial side of things that it'd be interesting to know whether there's anything's likely to change.
Are you asking me or the church commissioners? I wish there was a straight, easy answer for that. I'd love to see us find a new way of supporting parishes that struggle financially on maintaining buildings. There'll be very few of the churches of the 226 I'm responsible for where there aren't building issues, very few. And we have some very faithful people working on fabric, and a great buildings team in the diocese, and a grants officer and all of that. So there's lots of support, as you know. There's no easy answer on the financial burden of maintaining buildings. I think what I've witnessed in the 3 years I've been Archdeacon is seeing people tackle kind of big buildings issues really well. And I've tried to be a signpost to other people and said, go and talk to them. They've had a similar problem. See how they cracked it. See how they raised the money for it. So try and just signpost people in that way. I hope we can move to a more sustainable model of supporting, but I haven't seen an answer yet. But thank you. It's one to pray about a lot and keep asking questions at a higher level than an archdeacon.
Rich, can I ask a question around the shape of priestly ministry? You articulated a really attractive vision of priestly ministry in rural settings, which sounded to me an almost episcopal type of ministry of oversight, of a focus of unity. Yeah. And I just wondered what your thoughts are on how satisfying that is often to local congregations, and how that transition in level of expectation is managed. And I say that as the incumbent of a single parish benefice, where the expectations and the realities of what was possible even 20, 30 years ago in a single parish, it is very different now.
I think we've had, for a lot of years, some clergy having oversight of a bigger area and getting on with it. It meets with resistance, and I've brought two benefices together in my time as Archdeacon, and it was and that came from the ground upwards. They wanted that. They thought that was the best way of working going forward. They thought it was the best financial sustainability as well. But it's created a big patch for one priest to look after. They are supported by a ministry team. But we're working through what a new model of ministry looks like there. It's very different from having the two priests that they were stipended priests that they were used to before. I think there's always, expectations are huge on clergy in multi-parish. And I think there's always an expectation that the vicar's going to turn up at everything in our village. And if they don't, there is grief. I think we've got to work, there needs to be really good fluid conversations about what expectations are like. And I think I'm a great believer in building teams, developing teams, lay and ordained working together. And I think when a team's working well and it communicates well together and beyond in its parishes, then I think that's when we see multi-parish ministry really flourish. When it's one person on their own trying to do it, it's very difficult. But I do think it's a model that works when it's right, when you've got the right team in place. And that doesn't need to be lots of people, but I think people need to know who their local minister is, and that might not be the incumbent, the rector or the vicar. It might be that a layperson is the local kind of go-to person. But I also don't want to see whoever's in the incumbent post completely disconnected from a church that's that is their responsibility. I want to see them still connected to that. I've used connected an awful lot tonight, I'm sorry. But they still need to have input into each place. But like you say, they've got an oversight role that is a bit episcopae. But it can work. I've done it myself, and when it works well, it works really well. And I think we see the best of everybody. I've got one benefice at the moment of 8 churches that when we appointed, they went from full time to 0.8. So the priest isn't around all the week. There's 2 days a week they're not around, and what they've been learning to do, and it's been a really interesting thing to watch, is they're meeting regularly as a benefice, but moving around churches. So not every village is getting their service as often as they were before, but what we're seeing is the congregation is growing, the gathered congregation is growing, new people are joining, and the new people are feeling connected to the benefice, not any individual church. And that's been fascinating to watch, and it's in its early days. But there's been a lot of effort in building relationships across the whole body that is the worshipping community across those 8 churches. And they're doing a lot gathering together. There's still services in each of the 8 churches at different times, but not at the rhythm they had them before. But each church has still got its own identity as well. But that's been really interesting to watch, and it's been the priest that's worked with a small group across the benefice to kind of put that into being, and he's supported by a team of lay and ordained colleagues to make it happen.
Can I add to that?
Drink microphone.
We're a benefice of 7, and we have for years worked very well with a team of lay elders. And I have to say that it's not the congregations that are upset when the incumbent is not available. It's those outside the church.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And you can guarantee that there'll be somebody will turn up on a Sunday when the service isn't at that church who hasn't been for a long time. Again, that's where I think communication's key. We need to make sure we communicate what we're doing as church on the ground as widely as possible in our rural communities, so people know where worship is happening. And I do try and stress that if there's not a regular service in your church, please make sure you've got displayed where the services are so people know. But no, I take your point. That's really important.
Archdeacon, can I ask you, are you involved at all with talking or connecting with Sizewell C?
I am, yes.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that, because not only are they afloat with funding, but when the build actually starts, there's going to be an awful lot of social issues as well. And David and myself went over there to the colleges, and of course they're going to fund a brand new college.
They are.
And, you know, we all want to bring younger people into churches.
Yes.
And I think that's a wonderful opportunity
It is.
for you, and I'm very pleased to hear that.
So I line manage. We've got a full-time chaplain at Sizewell C, who I line manage, and which is remarkable. And so they fund that, but it's through the diocese. It's a diocesan role, but Sizewell fund that, and he's doing a great job. And as the workforce grows and grows, he's got an amazing ministry there. And we're just looking at appointing some volunteer chaplains to support him because he's got that much on. I absolutely agree. There's funding there, and I've been encouraging churches, particularly around there, to kind of tap into that. And we're going to see. I live quite close to it, so I see it all day, every day. But we'll see the communities change in different ways, and new people coming and joining. And we're particularly in Leiston and Sizewell, we are thinking about how we respond as church, and the deanery chapter there have got that as a focus for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've used the word connected, as you said a lot, but you've connected us this evening to the rural church as an urban church, not just in knowledge and a sense of solidarity, but also theologically. You've helped us work out what are the similarities, how we might learn, and I think there are all sorts of things that urban churches can learn from rural churches. You've been a point of unity. But you've also drawn out a really, I think, a hopeful vision. And I think far too often the stories that we're told that you see in newspapers and magazines is that it's a kind of a negative story, but actually I feel so much more hopeful and positive, and I kind of think, I quite fancy perhaps...
Do you want to jump?
Rich, thank you so much. It's been a real joy to have you here. You're such a wonderful priest and archdeacon, and we're grateful to have you as an interim for such a short space of time, but to have you in the diocese still. Please give Rich a really big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.